Could you elaborate on how to get your first job and get your foot in the door?
I guess I really don't know what Christmas is all about.
Hey everyone, I'm Ashley Janelle, and today we are wrapping up our series around UI/UX design. Today's video is going to be focused on kind of that end of the process when you're actually looking to get a job, you're thinking about portfolios, you're thinking about interviewing and things like that. I asked you guys to send me questions and you guys did. So I'm going to be using those like I've been using those in the other videos to kind of structure the conversation. But again, we're going to be talking portfolios, interviewing, things like that. So let's go ahead and get into it. But before we do, make sure that you are subscribed to my channel. Make sure that you do not miss out on any of the other amazing content that I have coming for the rest of Vlogmas this December and any other content that we have coming. So now, without further ado, let's get into it. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Like I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about portfolios. That's where we're going to start. We're going to talk portfolios and interviews. Earlier in the series, we talked about things like what UX actually is, who it's for, how to best learn. Should you attend a boot camp or should you go the self-taught route? We talked about a lot of different options in terms of the pros and cons of both, what it takes to transitioning from another career field, whether it be technical or non-technical. So if you missed those videos, make sure that you go ahead and check out the other videos in this series. But today we are going to focus on portfolios and interviews. And I'm actually going to start with the question that I received. So that first question that I received is that it's really hard to get my foot in the door. Can you talk a little bit about the process? Could you elaborate on how to get your first job and get your foot in the door? So I think that this is a really, really great question. And as it pertains to portfolios, I will say that your portfolio is going to be the biggest asset that you have. It's going to be more important than your resume. It's going to be more important than your application, to be honest. I mean, yes, your application should be filled out correctly and things like that. But the first thing that the hiring manager is going to be looking at is that portfolio. It's a simple link that we just throw, right into the computer, and we get our first impressions within 3 to 5 seconds. So really keeping in mind things like, what is that first impression that your user is getting? Your user being your hiring manager, a hiring manager, or a potential design team. We also take a look as design teams at various portfolios to see, who are you, and, just try to evaluate your skills and projects and things like that. But really reverse engineer that process and think, okay, if I was a hiring manager, what would I want to see when I first open up someone's portfolio or I go to their website? Make sure that your projects aren't too difficult to find. Make sure that they're not, it doesn't take too many clicks or too much scrolling to get to your portfolio, or to get to your projects. Make sure that you can clearly articulate and tell me on your portfolio who you are very clearly in 1 to 2 sentences. Are you a user experience researcher? Are you a UI designer? Are you a strategist? Do you do a mixture of both, of all of those three? Really make sure that you are selling yourself on that portfolio. You can have an about page. I don't think it should be too long, but something that, lets your reader or your viewer know exactly who you are. And when you actually get into those projects, really make sure that you are telling the story about what you did throughout that process, how you actually came to find the solution. Make sure that you talk about what the problem was, and don't leave anything out. I've done a lot of, I know I talked a little bit about my boot camp, my 16-week boot camp. So in my boot camp, I actually teach portfolios and how to put together a winning portfolio and what hiring managers are going to be looking for. Outside of that, I've also done some portfolio auditing, which is where I would audit portfolios from aspiring UX designers who did not take my class. And one of the things that I noticed when I was auditing these portfolios, I would say about 75% of the portfolios that I audited were missing a lot of information. So when you think about a portfolio piece, or when you think about a project, you should really think about it in totality from beginning to end. So really clearly stating and articulating what was the problem that you were trying to solve. And then jumping to the solution is not enough. What happened in the middle? What was the problem that you tried to solve? What different ways did you attempt to solve that problem? You want to make sure that you're clearly articulating and clearly illustrating how you actually attempted to solve that problem. That's really, really important. There's so many things that take place during the research phase or during the strategy phase or during the maybe branding or rebranding phase. There's just so many things that, the usability testing phase. Like, make sure that you are including everything, that every part of the process that you did. Even if you attempted to do something and it didn't really work out, maybe you attempted a research method and that didn't really get you the results that you wanted. Include that. Talk about why that didn't work out. Don't just leave things out because you feel like you don't know how to show them or display them or talk about them, because now what it seems like is that you did not have a clear, and not even just clear, but you did not have a thorough and full process. So really make sure that you are including everything in those portfolios. That's really, really important. And make sure that you're telling that story and not just using your solution as the selling point to that particular project. I see that a lot, where it's just like, well, here are my high fidelity mock-ups. Well, that's not necessarily all that a hiring manager or design team wants to see, and it's really not going to be good enough, because where did you get those mock-ups? I want to see the process. How did you actually get there? That's really, really going to be important. So making sure that your portfolio is clear, concise, and that you're really, really telling that story to the best of your ability. So another question that was asked was, what software is best used when trying to put together a portfolio? So there are a couple of things that you're going to want to make sure that you do. Number one, you're going to want to make sure that you have all of your assets. So your assets are going to comprise of your written assets. So obviously, if you've taken a look at UX portfolios, you know that they are very heavy on the copy. You have to be kind of heavy on the copy because that is how you are going to tell your story. So you're going to have your copy assets. You're also going to have your visual assets. So not just your high fidelity mock-ups, but any imagery that also coincides with that copy. That's also going to be really, really important. So make sure that along the way of you working through this problem and things like that, make sure that you are documenting, taking pictures of everything, saving all of your assets, because you're going to need them for your portfolio. Going back to my previous statement about how I see a lot of portfolios that have just left a lot of things out, you want to make sure that you don't do that. And a good way to do that is to make sure that you're documenting along the way. So that's one thing. You're going to have your assets, your copy assets, and your visual assets. And then you're also going to need some sort of a place to actually put this portfolio. One of the great places that I would definitely recommend to start as a aspiring UX designer, and even honestly as maybe like a senior UX designer as well, is just with the Squarespace. Squarespace has a variety of layouts that you can choose from. Their interfaces are very clean. They are aesthetically pleasing. They are, the UX has been built in a way that is very functional and very easy for people to use and find things. As long as you don't make it, complicated when you get in there and actually start, playing with templates and things like that. You want to make sure that you're still keeping it simple, but Squarespace is a really great place to start if you're looking for somewhere to actually host your website, somewhere to actually, use templates and build upon and things like that. I would definitely recommend Squarespace. If you are looking for a platform that maybe goes another step further in terms of interactions and different design templates and things like that, and different things that you can do to really wow your audience, Webflow would definitely be the place to go. So Webflow is going to be another place where you can host your website. They also have templates, like I said, and things like that. But it's really going to be heavy on the back end. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I would definitely recommend, I don't think that just using a template from Webflow, it doesn't really work the same way as Squarespace. I feel like a developer is definitely needed for getting a fully functioning Webflow website, especially if you want to take advantage of all of the features and elements that Webflow allows. You might need to pair with a developer, and they do have access to developers and things like that. They have a community of people that work within Webflow to help you and things like that. You might have to pay them, but that's another route that you can go. But for aspiring UX designers, I really want you guys to keep it simple. Focus on the content, focus on the actual portfolio pieces that you have, and less on like where it's hosted. That's why I think Squarespace is a perfectly great option. It still keeps your website functional and elegant and things like that, and really just gets the job done. So now let's get into interviews. We had a lot of questions around interviews. Obviously, interviews are going to be really, really important. Making sure that, I know I talked in previous videos about partnering with a mentor or a coach. You really want to make sure that you partner with someone who has been through a UX interview before, especially if you are new to the especially if you're new to the technical field or to the creative field. Going through an interview for UX is very different. It's going to be comprised of several different things, and I'm probably going to answer the question. Let me just read the question. What does the UX interview look like? Okay, so I'm going to get into it and kind of break it down and explain it. So it could be a myriad of things. It really just depends on the company that you are interviewing for. So obviously the first part of a lot of interview processes is going to look like a phone screener, where you'll get a phone call from the company and they will ask you simple questions about maybe, you know, where you've worked, or they might ask you little questions about your design process, some of the projects in your portfolio, some of the design tools that you've used in the past. But it won't necessarily be anything where you're like actually walking someone through your portfolio. Typically, it's very easy questions, things that you can kind of prepare for maybe a couple of days before, things like that. I would also recommend anytime you have an interview with a company, especially if it's a larger company, looking online, sites like Glassdoor, they have a lot of good information on questions that have been asked in the past. You might be able to find some questions and some information around how to interview at that particular company. I think that's something that a lot of people miss as well. But the next part, after you get kind of past the screener, the next part will typically be some sort of a portfolio walkthrough. So at this point, you can safely assume that your portfolio is interesting enough, it's intriguing enough, it has gotten the attention of the company. So they're not necessarily looking for you to, like, it's not show and tell, right? They're not necessarily looking for you to say, oh, here's this project and here's that project. They really want to know about the problems that you solved and how you exactly solved those problems. So that's why I say that it's always really important to make sure that you explain or that you illustrate the entire process and don't leave anything out, because any holes that you leave out are going to be really difficult to fill in when you're not actually looking at it. If there were things that you did in the process that you didn't include in your portfolio, when you're looking at your portfolio or you're presenting your portfolio, it's going to be kind of difficult to remember what those things were. So having those things in there, one of the things that I tell my students, that it's an exercise that we do in my course, is have them pick out 3 different talking points, 3 different themes that were very interesting and that they want to make sure that they touch on for each project in a portfolio review. So you're probably not going to have time to talk about every project, and that's fine, but you want to make sure that you're prepared to talk about every project. So pulling out different themes, pulling out high points, low points, areas where you learned and areas where you really developed a lot of your UX skills are really going to be important as you move forward and start talking about your portfolio and are able to really demonstrate the skill range that you have when it pertains to solving problems and thinking through problems and solutions and things like that. Depending on the company, they might have you do a portfolio review that is a bit different. It depends on the company, and it also depends on the level that you're going for. So they might give you guidelines and say, these are the things that we want you to talk about, or these are the ideas that we want you to pull out of the work that you've done from your portfolio. So you essentially have to kind of rebuild your portfolio. It doesn't have to be like a website or pixel perfect, but they really want you to think about the projects that you worked on in the context of how that company particularly works, if that makes any sense. So one example could be, you know, if really being customer focused or customer centered is really important to, you know, the company that you're interviewing for, they may say, show me some examples in your portfolio where you have been customer centered. And so you will go into your portfolio and you will find those examples and you will pull them out and you will put them into different slides. It's a different portfolio than the one that you have online or the one that you submitted. So that will be something that they will help you with, they will coach you with or coach you on, and they will give you a breakdown and a rubric for exactly what it is that they're looking for. So that's something to be prepared for. That's nothing that you can prepare for in advance. That's something that you're going to kind of have to roll with if that's something that they do ask of you. So we covered the screener. We talked about your portfolio, what that looks like to kind of walk through your portfolio. We also talked about a potential portfolio that they might ask you for. You might have something called a design challenge, which is where you are given a problem on the spot and you have to solve it on the spot. So you might not necessarily be going into like high fidelity designs and mocks, but what they're looking for is how you think. They want to see your process for solving problems. They may throw different things into the mix as you get a little further down, throw in what they call constraints. So that's kind of just something to kind of trick you a little bit or to get you thinking a little bit more on the fly. Well, what happens if we do this, or what happens if we add that, or what happens if we have this problem? And so you're really solving that problem on the fly. So for design challenges, I really recommend going onto YouTube and putting in like UX design challenges and seeing how people solve problems. Take a look at their process. I would definitely recommend doing a few design challenges on your own, timing yourself to like 15, 30 minutes. I don't know how long you're gonna get. They should tell you, but you wanna make sure that you are prepared to be timed and that you have had practice doing these design challenges. Typically, the problems are pretty simple, but they might throw in some really interesting constraints. So really the muscle that you're trying to exercise when you're practicing is thinking on the fly, making sure that you are comfortable with kind of illustrating your process, making sure that you're comfortable with being timed and knowing that you only have a few minutes for this, a few minutes for that, a few minutes for this. So that's really something that you'll want to work on as well. And then you also might have something, just a regular interview process where they're asking you questions. I would definitely take a look at something called the STAR method. So the STAR method is just a way of answering questions typically in interviews. If you are not familiar with the STAR method, go ahead and Google it, YouTube it. There are a lot of examples of what the STAR method is, why it's important, why it's helpful, and how to best ace your interview using the STAR method. So that's kind of a typical rundown of UX interviews. Again, making sure that you know your portfolio forwards and backwards is going to be the biggest piece of that. Making sure that you can answer any questions that interviewers have. You may have an interview where you just talk about one portfolio piece because you're so dialed into that piece and there's so much conversation around it. So just really making sure that you have the depth and the knowledge to go there. One of the things that I think is really interesting is in my particular course, every student, they do their own work. So there is no collaboration in terms of projects. There are some courses where one person may work on the research, another person works on the strategy, another person works on the high fidelity mock-ups. And I feel like that does a disservice to everyone involved because, well, to you specifically as the interviewee, the person that's learning UX and things like that, just for a reason that you can probably guess, which is that you're only dialed in on one particular part. When you get into these interviews, you have to know every single part of the process forwards and backwards. And that's another thing I will say. If you are in a course where there is group work, make sure that you have full ownership of each part of the process. So make sure that you are fully involved in each part of the process and you can speak to what you did working on each part of the. Let's say you're only working on the high fidelity mock-ups, make sure that you are heavily involved in the research. That's really going to be important for you because you cannot put someone else's work in your portfolio. It not only is plagiarism, but it will also show when you do not have the depth and the range to talk about why you went with a particular research method over another one, or exactly, what this user said and how this tied into the strategy and how, several users had an opinion of XYZ and things like that. Like it shows when you did not do 100% of the work. So just that's one little tip for those of you who are in courses and are doing group work. Make sure that you have the ability to talk about everything. Okay, so the next question is a really good one, and it is, Can you talk through how you landed a job? I'm struggling to land interviews after having multiple case studies. So I kind of addressed this already, but your portfolio is going to be your meal ticket to an interview, and how well you perform in that interview and how well you articulate your portfolio, your process, and all of that kind of stuff is going to be whether or not you are in the running for the job. So I'm not really gonna touch on that one again, but please revisit so I'm not gonna really revisit that one again, but I just wanna underscore the fact that if you are applying for multiple jobs and you are not hearing anything back, and when I say multiple jobs, I mean like you've applied for dozens of jobs, you are not hearing, you're not getting a call back, or maybe you're just getting to the first round, but you're not really getting past that, I would stop interviewing, I would stop applying, and I would honestly try to find someone that can help you, whether it's a mentor or a UX coach, someone who can help to course correct what's going on, because it sounds like it is something that's going on with your portfolio, with the way that you are presenting yourself, that isn't really curling all the way over for hiring managers. So I would take a look at your portfolio, take a look at hiring a mentor or finding a coach or something like that, and having them really help you. This question is also a really good one, and that is, when you're first starting out as a junior UX designer, what are some of the companies or the types of companies that you should go for? Should you go for a startup? Should you go for a large size company, a mid-sized company, big tech, all that kind of stuff? So honestly, I don't really think that I think that there is this misconception that, oh, I'm a new UX designer, I should start out at a startup. Larger companies, mid-sized companies, smaller companies, they're not going to necessarily want to, well, maybe not smaller companies, but there's a misconception that mid-sized to larger companies are not going to want to hire junior UX designers. And honestly, that's just not true. Companies that are looking for UX designers are placing value on your skill of knowing how to solve problems and that design thinking process. Whether you are junior or whether you're senior, it really doesn't matter. If they have an open role for a junior UX designer, or someone, a little bit more entry level, they're not gonna not look at you because you haven't worked at a startup for a year. I really want us to not necessarily place emphasis on where we land, and place more of an emphasis on, is my work the best work that I can put forward? Have I done as much as I can do in my portfolio, explaining my process, illustrating my process? Do I know how to talk through, my portfolio? All the things that we've talked about. I want us to focus on that. Now, whether you go to a startup or you go to, a different size company, that is really on you. There are pros and cons to working at a startup. There are pros and cons to working at large to mid-size to large companies. Obviously at startups, one of the good things is that you're going to get a lot of experience. Typically at startups, they are going to have you wear many hats. So maybe you are a UX strategist, but you're also dabbling in the research as well. You're going to be in charge of doing a lot of different things. If you're a UI designer and you enjoy designing, they may put you in charge of, coming up with the brand guidelines and running the design system. You might get some really interesting skills under your belt, but you also might get those skills at a mid-sized to large company as well. It really just depends on the company. It depends on the team. It depends on what the need is at the time. So it really just depends. I think part of the question was, what kind of company should I go for? And to be honest, go for the company that you want to go for. If they have a role open for someone like yourself that you feel like you fit the criteria for, if you feel like you fit if the criteria says 0 to 1 years or 1 to whatever it is, and you fit the criteria, and that's for anything, go for that role. Don't dumb yourself down or feel like you are not fit or you're not able or you're not equipped to go for that role at a company because you're intimidated by the name. Just apply. Just apply. The worst that can happen is that you either don't get a call back, or you do get a call back and you go through the interview process and you don't get the job. But guess what? If you go through the interview process, you're going to learn something. You're going to learn about that company. You're going to learn about what they were looking for through that interview process. You're going to learn how to go through the interview process. And to be honest, going through a UX interview process is something that is going to help you build a lot of skills as well. So it's one thing for me to sit here and talk through, how to go through an interview process and what it looks like and what kind of questions they might ask. But it's another to actually go through that process. In my boot camp, I walk my students through that process and we do kind of like mock interviews and things like that. But that, the actual interview process is a way for you to gain experience interviewing. I know you guys have probably heard that before. Interviewing is interviewing. And at the end of the day, even though this kind of interview might be different from an interview that you've done before, interviewing is still interviewing, and it takes practice. It takes practice to learn how to sell yourself and how to deliver the information that you have to sell, which in this case is your experience and your portfolio, your resume, and things like that. So back to the question around what size company or what type of company I think that you guys should go for as aspiring UX designers. Go for what it is that you want to go for. Don't feel like you have to put yourself in a box because of your level of experience. So that is going to wrap up today's video, and that is going to wrap up this chapter of UX. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something. Let me know in the comments what you learned. Let me know what questions you guys have. I can do more videos like this. Just let me know, exactly where you guys are struggling, and I will do my best to answer your questions, to help you, to find creative ways via YouTube to allow you to feel more confident going through the interview process or going through, building your portfolio or choosing a boot camp or whatever it is, all these things that we've talked about over the last several videos. So thank you guys again for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.